Daniel Carter had been on many diplomatic missions before, but nothing could have prepared him for this. As a representative of humanity, he was sent to the grand capital of the Zalarian Empire, a powerful alien civilization known for their advanced technology and strict traditions. His mission was simple: finalize a peace treaty that would ensure stable relations between Earth and the Zalarian people. After days of negotiation, the treaty was finally signed. To celebrate, Daniel was invited to a royal banquet at the Emperor's Grand Palace. The hall was enormous, filled with glowing crystals, alien musicians playing strange yet beautiful melodies, and towering Zalarian nobles dressed in elegant ceremonial robes. Despite the unfamiliar surroundings, Daniel remained composed, sipping a golden-colored drink offered by one of the attendants. Everything was going smoothly, until the Zalarian princess, Vayara, stood from her seat and pointed directly at him. "I have chosen my mate," she declared, her voice echoing across the hall. Silence fell. Every Zalarian in the room turned their eyes toward Daniel. The weight of 100 alien gazes pressed on him, and for the first time in his career, Daniel was speechless. "Me," he managed to say, his voice uncertain. "As your mate? You can't be serious." But Vayara's expression was unreadable. Her sharp golden eyes studied him, as if assessing his reaction. She was tall, elegant, and had an air of authority around her. Unlike human women, her Zalarian features included intricate markings on her skin that shimmered under the palace lights, and her long silver hair flowed like liquid metal. The Emperor, sitting beside her, nodded approvingly. "It is decided. The alliance shall be strengthened by this union." Daniel's mind raced. Union? Does that mean marriage? He turned to his Zalarian translator, an older alien named Kormal. "What the hell is happening?" This wasn't in the negotiations. Kormal hesitated before responding. Zalarian customs dictate that in any major diplomatic agreement, the strongest representative is chosen as the royal consort. Your performance in negotiations proved your intelligence and strength. Thus, Princess Vayara has selected you. Daniel blinked. "That's insane. I'm just a diplomat, not a prince." Vayara raised an eyebrow. "Do you refuse my claim?" Daniel could feel the tension in the room growing. Saying no outright might insult the Zalarian royal family, and the treaty could fall apart. But saying yes meant he would be bound to an alien princess he had just met. Trapped in a situation he never expected, Daniel realized he needed to choose his words carefully. "I think we need to talk about this," he finally said. The Emperor chuckled, as if amused by the human's hesitation. "Then let the trials begin." Daniel had no idea what that meant, but something told him his problems were only just beginning. Daniel Carter stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. He had come to the Zalarian Empire as a diplomat, expecting formal discussions and political agreements, not an unexpected engagement to an alien princess. The banquet hall was still silent, all eyes on him. Princess Vayara sat gracefully, watching him with an unreadable expression. Her silver hair shimmered under the soft glow of the palace lights, and her golden eyes locked onto his, waiting for an answer. "Trials." Daniel finally spoke, turning to Kormal, his Zalarian translator. "What does he mean by trials?" Kormal sighed. "The Zalarian royal court has strict traditions. A mate is not just chosen based on appearance or status. They must prove themselves worthy through a series of challenges." Daniel groaned. "Of course, there are challenges. Why wouldn't there be?" The Emperor leaned forward, his deep voice filling the room. "You have impressed us with your intelligence and negotiation skills. But now you must prove your strength, resilience, and honor. Only then can you stand beside my daughter." Daniel swallowed. He had no intention of marrying an alien princess, but he also couldn't afford to insult them. If he refused outright, it could ruin the peace treaty between Earth and the Zalarian Empire. Vayara studied him closely. "You seem troubled, human." Daniel turned to her, frustrated. You just declared me your mate without asking me. On Earth, we don't do things like this." The princess tilted her head. "And yet, you have not refused." Daniel hesitated. She had a point. He hadn't exactly said no. He was just trying to find a way out without causing a diplomatic disaster. Cormal whispered, "Be careful. If you insult the princess in public, it could be seen as a challenge to her honor." Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. This was getting worse by the second. "Fine," he said finally. "What exactly do these trials involve?" The emperor smiled, clearly pleased. "You will face 3 tests, one of strength, one of intelligence, and one of spirit. If you succeed, you will have earned the right to stand beside Vayara. And if I fail?" Vayara's lips curled slightly. "Then you will prove yourself unworthy, and I will choose another." Daniel exhaled in relief. "So all I have to do is fail the trials." "Perfect." The emperor clapped his hands. "The first trial begins at dawn. Rest well, human. You will need your strength." As the banquet resumed and the nobles returned to their conversations, Daniel slumped in his chair. He had one night to figure out how to fail without embarrassing himself, and without getting himself killed. Vayara, however, watched him with quiet curiosity. Something about this human intrigued her. She was looking forward to seeing what he would do next. Morning came far too quickly for Daniel. He hadn't slept much, his mind racing through every possible scenario. By the time the Zalarian attendants arrived to escort him to the first trial, he felt more tired than ready. Still, he couldn't afford to show weakness. Not yet. The arena was massive, its walls made of glowing stone and shimmering blue energy fields. Dozens of Zalarian nobles and warriors had gathered to watch the human face his first test. Princess Vayara stood in a high balcony, her sharp golden eyes focused entirely on him. Daniel took a deep breath. Just play along. Remember, the plan is to fail without looking completely useless. Cormal appeared beside him. "The first trial is a test of strength," he explained quietly. "You must defeat a combat drone, one programmed to mimic the abilities of a seasoned Xylarian warrior." "Great," Daniel muttered. "Just what I need. A robot gladiator." As if on cue, a large metallic figure entered the arena. It stood taller than Daniel, its humanoid frame covered in gleaming silver armor. Red lights flashed along its joints as it powered up, gripping the heavy staff-like weapon. Daniel's first instinct was to run, but that wasn't an option. Instead, he tried to remember what little self-defense training he'd received back on Earth. He didn't have the raw strength of a Zalarian, but he did have one advantage: human adaptability. The drone moved first, swinging its staff in a quick, powerful arc. Daniel barely dodged in time, rolling to the side as the weapon smashed into the ground, leaving a small crater. The crowd murmured in approval at his agility. "Okay, just don't get hit," Daniel muttered to himself. The drone advanced again, its movements fast and precise. Daniel stayed on the defensive, dodging and weaving. He realized that the drone was programmed to fight an opponent who stood their ground, not someone who relied on speed and quick thinking. As the fight dragged on, Daniel noticed the drone was becoming slower. It was designed for short, intense combat. Prolonged engagements seemed to cause its reactions to lag. He used that to his advantage, dodging and circling until the machine's movements became predictable. Finally, an opportunity presented itself. The drone overextended on a swing, and Daniel grabbed a broken piece of the staff from the arena floor. With a burst of adrenaline, he struck the drone's exposed joint, causing it to collapse. The crowd erupted in cheers. Even Vayara looked surprised, and maybe even impressed. But Daniel felt a sinking feeling in his gut. He hadn't meant to win. Cormal approached, his expression unreadable. "You've passed the first trial. Congratulations." Daniel wiped the sweat from his face, staring up at the princess. She gave him a small nod, as if acknowledging his unexpected victory. "Well," he muttered, So much for failing on purpose. After the adrenaline-fueled combat trial, Daniel hoped the second challenge would be less life-threatening. Instead of returning to his quarters, he was led into a vast chamber filled with glowing platforms, suspended crystals, and intricate patterns etched into the walls. The air itself seemed to hum with energy, and above it all, Princess Vayara watched from a raised platform. Cormal joined him at the entrance, holding a small metallic sphere. "This is the trial of intelligence," he explained. "You must activate the chamber's central mechanism by placing this sphere into the correct slot. However, each incorrect move triggers a response." "Response?" Daniel asked, already feeling his stomach knot. "You'll see," Cormal said with a small, unhelpful smile. Daniel stepped inside cautiously, the metallic sphere in hand. The chamber was massive, the floor divided into a grid of glowing panels. Symbols, some familiar, others completely alien, floated above certain tiles. In the center of the room, a pedestal stood with multiple openings, each shaped slightly differently. The challenge seemed simple at first glance: identify the correct slot and place the sphere inside. But as he looked closer, he realized just how complex the puzzle was. Every tile appeared to be part of a larger pattern, and the symbols floating above them seemed to shift the longer he stared. "Great," Daniel muttered. "So, what happens if I guess wrong?" His question was answered when he stepped onto a tile at random. Immediately, a beam of energy shot from the wall, narrowly missing him and leaving a scorched mark on the floor. "Okay, not that one," he said quickly, stepping back. The audience above laughed, some amused, others unimpressed. He caught a glimpse of Vayara's expression. She wasn't laughing, but she wasn't showing concern either. She was observing him closely, as if trying to understand how a human might tackle such a trial. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. He didn't have the physical strength of the Zolarian warriors or their deep understanding of the Empire's traditions, but he did have one advantage: the ability to see connections others might overlook. He studied the symbols more carefully. While they appeared random at first, he began noticing patterns. Some tiles had symbols that matched the shapes on the pedestal. Others had symbols that appeared mirrored or inverted versions. It was like solving a riddle, one piece at a time. Taking a deep breath, he carefully stepped on a tile that had a matching symbol. The floor beneath him glowed softly. No energy beams. Encouraged, he continued across the grid, testing his theory. At last, he reached the pedestal. There were 6 openings, but one symbol on the pedestal's base matched the floating symbol on the tile he'd last stepped on. Daniel placed the sphere into that slot. The room went silent. Then, with a soft hum, the entire chamber lit up, and the pedestal began to spin slowly. Cheers erupted from the audience. Daniel wiped his forehead, half relieved, half annoyed. Cormal approached, his expression calm. "Well done, human. You have completed the second trial." Daniel looked up at Vayara. This time, she wasn't just observing. She nodded slightly, a hint of respect in her gaze. Daniel sighed. "I really need to stop being good at these things." The third trial was unlike the others. Daniel was led into a quiet, dimly lit chamber. It wasn't a battleground, and there were no puzzles in sight. Instead, the room seemed serene, too serene. The air felt heavy, and a faint, rhythmic hum resonated in the walls. Cormal stood with him at the entrance, explaining the purpose of this challenge. "This is a test of spirit. Here, you will face visions, illusions meant to provoke fear, doubt, and despair. The true test is how you respond. If you let the visions break your resolve, you fail. If you endure them, you pass." Daniel glanced around the chamber. "So, no fighting, no physical puzzles." "None," Cormal confirmed. "This is about inner strength, human. Let your spirit prove its worth." Daniel felt a knot of tension in his chest. He didn't know what to expect, but he understood one thing. This trial would test his mind and emotions, not his body or intellect. He stepped into the chamber alone. At first, nothing happened. The room was silent except for the gentle hum. Daniel waited, shifting his weight nervously, wondering what kind of visions would appear. Then the walls seemed to ripple. Shadows lengthened, and the room grew darker. A flickering image took shape before him. A memory he recognized instantly. It was Earth, specifically the small colony outpost where he had once worked as a negotiator. He saw himself standing in the middle of a heated debate, surrounded by angry colonists and alien delegates. The air was thick with tension. "I can't do this," the past version of himself said, shaking his head. "I'm not good enough. Someone else should handle this." Daniel frowned, watching the scene unfold. He remembered that moment, his first major failure as a negotiator. Back then, he had frozen, unable to find the right words. The talks had collapsed, and he had spent weeks blaming himself. "Do you still feel that way?" a voice whispered. Daniel spun around, but no one was there. The chamber seemed alive now, shifting and whispering. Another image appeared. This time, it was the battle against the combat drone. But in this version, the drone struck him down. He lay on the ground, defeated and bleeding, while the Xylurian audience laughed and jeered. "Why do you keep trying?" the voice taunted. "You're just a human. You'll never be enough." Daniel clenched his fists. The visions felt so real, but he knew they were just that, visions. "I know what this is," he muttered. "I've made mistakes. I've failed before, but I'm still here, aren't I?" The voice didn't answer, but the shadows grew thicker. The images changed, showing people he cared about walking away, turning their backs on him. It stung, but Daniel forced himself to remember the truth. "This isn't real," he said firmly. "I've faced worse. I've been in tougher situations, and I didn't give up then. I'm not giving up now." The whispers faded, and the chamber's light began to return. Slowly, the illusions disappeared. When the room was silent again, Cormal entered. He didn't say much, but his approving nod spoke volumes. "You have passed." As Daniel stepped back into the main hall, he looked up to see Princess Vayara watching him. This time, there was no shock or surprise in her expression. There was only respect, and perhaps a hint of admiration. When Daniel emerged from the trial chamber, his legs felt unsteady. The mental strain had been exhausting. He half expected the Xylurian attendants to escort him back to his quarters, but instead, Cormal appeared with a sly smile. "Well done, human," Cormal said, his tone oddly cheerful. "You've passed all 3 trials." Daniel nodded slowly, still catching his breath. "Great. Does that mean I can go home now?" Cormal's smile widened. "Not exactly. There is one final step." Daniel sighed. Of course there is. He was led into a different part of the palace, where a grand audience chamber awaited. Rows of Xylurian nobles lined the sides, their eyes fixed on him. At the far end of the chamber sat the emperor on his throne, with Princess Vayara standing beside him. Daniel was directed to the center of the room, facing the emperor directly. His heart sank. Something about this didn't feel like a simple congratulations ceremony. The emperor's voice boomed. "You have shown strength, intelligence, and spirit. You have completed the trials with honor. But a true union is not forged through tests alone." "Wait," Daniel interrupted, holding up his hands. "I thought the trials were the deciding factor." The emperor raised a brow. "The trials are a test of individual worth. But a partnership, even one as unusual as this, requires mutual understanding. Thus, you must now speak directly with Princess Vayara and determine whether you are truly compatible." Daniel blinked. "So, you're telling me we have to sit down and just talk?" Vayara stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "Do you find that so surprising, human? Is it not your custom to know someone before making such decisions?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. She had a point, but considering everything that had happened so far, the combat, the puzzle, the spirit test. This felt almost anticlimactic. Still, he had no choice. The Emperor gestured to a smaller chamber off to the side, where Viara was already walking. The attendants urged Daniel forward, and he reluctantly followed. Inside, the chamber was quiet, with only a simple table and 2 chairs. Viara took one seat and motioned for him to sit across from her. "Okay," Daniel said, sitting down. "What now?" Viara studied him. "Why do you wish to avoid this union so much?" He hesitated. "It's not that I have anything against you personally. It's just, this whole situation is a bit overwhelming. I didn't come here expecting to become someone's mate, especially not a princess's." Viara tilted her head, considering his words. "You value your freedom, then. More than you know." She nodded slowly. "I did not expect this situation either. I chose you because our traditions demanded it. But now, I see that perhaps we both want the same thing. A choice." Daniel blinked. "What are you saying?" Viara leaned forward slightly, her golden eyes serious. "I'm saying that perhaps we should decide together, without the weight of tradition. If we must stand as equals, let us start now." For the first time, Daniel felt like they were finally speaking as 2 individuals, not as a human and as a Illyrian princess bound by custom. Perhaps, he thought, this was a step towards something more meaningful than any trial could prove. Daniel leaned back in his chair, trying to make sense of what Princess Viara had just said. For days now, he'd been caught in the whirlwind of Illyrian tradition, battling combat drones, solving puzzles, and enduring haunting visions. But now, here he was, in a simple room, having a genuine conversation with the person who had chosen him as her mate. "So you're saying you're not sure about this either?" he asked cautiously. Viara's golden eyes met his. "It's not that I doubt your worth, human. You have proven yourself through the trials. But I did not expect someone so different from our people to challenge the way I see things." Daniel gave a nervous laugh. "Challenging the way you see things? All I've been trying to do is survive without messing up this treaty." A faint smile crossed Viara's lips. "Exactly. You see things differently. You approach problems in ways we Illyrian do not. I chose you because our customs said I should. But now I wonder if there is more to this choice than tradition." He scratched the back of his neck. "I'm not sure I follow." Viara folded her hands on the table. "If we are to be allies, true allies, then perhaps it is time we start acting like it. Our traditions served us well in the past, but they may not be the answer for the future. You, Daniel Carter, represent something new." Daniel frowned. "A new way of picking royal mates." "No," she said, her voice firm. "A new way of thinking. A new kind of partnership based not on ritual, but on understanding." For a moment, Daniel didn't know what to say. This entire ordeal had been about following ancient Illyrian traditions. Now, the princess herself seemed to be questioning them. "So what are you suggesting?" he asked finally. Viara's gaze softened. "I am suggesting that we both make a choice, together. If we agree to continue this union, it will be because we see the value in it, not because an ancient custom demands it. And if we decide it is not what we truly want, we will part as allies, not as adversaries." Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You really mean that? You're willing to let go of all the traditions and just decide?" Yes. It was the first time Daniel had heard a clear, honest answer since he'd arrived in the Illyrian Empire. No riddles, no tests, no formalities, just a direct response. He considered her words carefully. If they chose to move forward together, it would set a new precedent, one based on trust and mutual respect. And if they didn't, the treaty would still stand, and he could return to Earth knowing he'd done his job. "Well," Daniel said, "I guess we'll need some time to think it over." Viara nodded. Agreed. For the first time, Daniel felt like he was no longer a pawn in someone else's game. Now, The choice was truly his. Over the next few days, Daniel and Vayara spent more time together. At first, their meetings were brief and formal, discussing Xylurian customs, their political alliance, and what the future might hold for both their peoples. But gradually, their conversations became more relaxed. They talked not only about duty and tradition, but also about their personal lives, their hopes, and their fears. Vayara was surprisingly open, admitting that she had never truly believed in the ancient rituals she was bound to follow. She confessed that she had felt trapped by her role as princess, constantly under pressure to live up to expectations she hadn't chosen for herself. "I've never had the chance to simply be," she said one afternoon, standing on the balcony of the royal palace. The view of the Xylurian capital was breathtaking, with its towering spires and shimmering energy streams, but Vayara's gaze was distant, as if she wasn't seeing it at all. "Everything I've done has been for the Empire, never for myself." Daniel nodded, leaning against the railing. "I know the feeling. On Earth, I've spent most of my career representing other people's interests, negotiating deals, keeping the peace. It's fulfilling in its own way, but sometimes I wonder if I'm just following orders without really thinking about what I want." She turned to him, her golden eyes softening. "And what do you want, Daniel?" He hesitated. The question wasn't easy to answer. He had come here with a single purpose, to secure a treaty and maintain peace. But now, things were different. This wasn't just a mission anymore. "I guess," he said slowly, "I just want something real. A connection that isn't forced or arranged. Something that feels right." Vayara tilted her head. "And do you think that is possible between us?" Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. Over the days, he had come to respect her intelligence, her strength, and her willingness to question her own traditions. She wasn't just a princess. She was a person. Someone who, like him, was searching for something genuine. "I think," he said carefully, "it could be. But only if we both truly want it." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "Perhaps we have more in common than I thought." The moment was interrupted by a messenger arriving to summon them both to the Emperor's chamber. The Emperor, as always, looked imposing on his throne, but his expression was calm. "You have had time to know each other," he said. "Have you made your decision?" Vayara glanced at Daniel, then stepped forward. "Yes, Father. I have decided that if we are to move forward, it must be our choice, not the choice of tradition." Daniel nodded in agreement. "I came here to build peace, not to follow an ancient custom. But I think peace can mean more than just a treaty. It can mean mutual respect. And maybe something more." The Emperor studied them both, his gaze unreadable. After a long pause, he nodded. "So be it." Daniel and Vayara exchanged a look of understanding. For the first time, the path ahead didn't feel forced. It felt like their own. The decision had been made. Daniel and Vayara would decide their future together, not based on tradition, but on their own mutual understanding. The Emperor's approval gave them the freedom to explore what their relationship could truly be. The next morning, Daniel and Vayara met in the palace gardens. The sprawling grounds were filled with towering, luminous plants, and soft streams of water flowed through crystalline channels. It was peaceful here, away from the weight of politics and royal expectations. Vayara walked beside Daniel, her silver hair catching the morning light. "I never imagined that a human would change the way I view my own people's customs," she said, her voice thoughtful. Daniel glanced at her. "I never imagined I'd end up in a position like this. But now that we're here, what do you think? About us, I mean." Vayara stopped and turned to face him. "I think that you've shown me something I didn't realize I was missing. Strength doesn't always mean following the old ways. Sometimes it means stepping outside of them, questioning them. I admire that about you." Her words caught him off guard. Over the weeks, Daniel had come to respect her courage and intelligence, but hearing her admit that she admired him made him pause. "You're not so bad yourself," he said with a small smile. "Most people wouldn't challenge their own traditions, especially not someone in your position. Vayara laughed softly. I suppose we're both full of surprises. They walked on in silence for a while, the gentle sound of water and the occasional call of a bird-like creature filling the air. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. If we go forward with this partnership, it'll mean more than just us. It'll set an example for everyone, humans and Solarians alike. Are you ready for that kind of responsibility? She met his gaze, her golden eyes steady. I've been carrying responsibility my entire life. This time, at least it would be for something I believe in. Daniel nodded, a sense of calm settling over him. I guess we'll just have to figure it out together. Vayara smiled. Together, then. As they turned back toward the palace, Daniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time since arriving on Zilar, the path ahead felt clear. Not simple, not easy, but clear. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew they'd face it as equals, with respect and understanding at the core of their partnership. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Daniel stood on the edge of the grand Xylarian balcony, the capital's shimmering skyline stretching out before him. The pale glow of the twin moons bathed the city in a soft, otherworldly light. Behind him, the palace halls buzzed with activity, nobles discussing treaties, couriers delivering messages, and the quiet hum of the advanced Xylarian technology that powered it all. But none of that mattered right now. Daniel's focus was on the decision he and Vayara had made together. Not out of obligation, not because of tradition, but because it felt like the right step forward. Princess Vayara joined him, her silver hair gleaming under the moonlight. She stood silently for a moment, as if taking in the same peaceful scene. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm. "We've chosen our path," she said. "Now we must walk it." Daniel smiled faintly. "You make it sound easy." "It won't be," Vayara admitted. "Our people will have questions. Some may challenge this decision. Others will embrace it. But that is the point, isn't it? To show that there is another way." He turned to face her. "So, what's next? How do we show them that this partnership, this bond we're forming, can work?" She gave a small, thoughtful nod. "We start by being true to ourselves. By working together, you bring your humanity, your creativity, your resilience, your unique way of thinking. I bring my knowledge of Xylarian customs, my experience with our people. Together, we will show them that we are stronger united than we are apart." Daniel studied her expression. There was no doubt in her eyes, no hesitation. She truly believed in what they were about to do. "For a long time," he said, "I've thought of myself as just a negotiator, someone who helps other people make decisions, settle disputes. But this is different. This feels bigger." "It is bigger," Vayara agreed. "This is not just about one treaty or one alliance. This is about proving that our differences can make us stronger, that when we trust each other, we create something better." Daniel let her words sink in. She was right. The trials, the doubts, the moments of uncertainty, they had all brought them to this point. And now they had a chance to create a bond that was more than just a political agreement. He extended his hand. "Then let's show them. Together." Vayara took his hand, her grip firm. Together. As they stood there under the twin moons, the weight of tradition and expectations lifted. They weren't just a human diplomat and a Xylarian princess anymore. They were partners, equals, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. And so a new chapter began, one built on mutual respect, understanding, and the hope that they could truly make a difference, not just for themselves, but for both their worlds.